I recently made a video where I explained my hypothesis that if you weren't there during the release of the original trilogy, Star Wars is the kind of franchise you have to be introduced to as a child in order to fall in love with. And despite all of Disney's and Lucasfilm's best efforts, it would appear the current generation of children aren't falling in love with Star Wars the way previous generations did. The problem is worse than that though. Not only are prospective new fans not falling in love with Star Wars, there is mounting evidence that the older pre-established fans are falling out of love with it as well. Seeing as I'm not really a fan to begin with, that is not something I can speak to myself. But my compatriots, Tom and Robb, can. In this video, they will share how they fell in love with Star Wars to begin with, and how and why they more recently have fallen out of love with the galaxy far away.
As the oldest member of Midnight's Edge, I was there in 1977 when Star Wars first premiered. However, I didn't get a chance to see it until almost a year and a half later. Movies ran much longer back then, and Star Wars was such a phenomenon that it was in theaters for an extended period of time. It was something that captivated fans both young and old. Older people were talking about it. Everyone at school was talking about it. It was such an event that you quite literally could not avoid it at the time. So I went to see Star Wars at a little theater here in my town with my parents and my brother. The lights went down and I heard the 20th Century Fox fanfare. I saw those words a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. Then there was that opening note with the words Star Wars as big as life on the screen. It was jarring, yet it was enthralling at the same time. You sat through the title crawl about the rebels winning their first battle and Princess Leia racing to get the stolen plans to her home planet of Alderaan. Then the camera descends and you see the planet. There's sort of a serenity there, and then the blockade runner emerges flying overhead, pursued by an Imperial Star Destroyer. I don't know who said it, but it was that moment that the film became bigger than the screen it was on. Even though I was young at the time, I knew in those opening moments that I had never seen anything like it, and I was never going to see anything quite like this again. Star Wars, for someone of my generation, became this larger-than-life experience in those moments. Unlike a lot of other movies at the time, there was this feeling that these were real people and that this was happening somewhere, and we were peering into this world. Luke, Han, Leia, Obi-Wan, Darth Vader, these all felt like real people, and you completely bought into this world that George Lucas had created and was presenting to you. I sat there, I saw the movie, and I really was blown away. The good guys won, the bad guys were defeated, and that was the end. Then around Christmas of that year, my older brother went to go see Star Trek the Motion Picture, and he came home excited for some reason. Then he told me, "You'll never guess what I saw. There's going to be another Star Wars movie. It's called The Empire's Revenge or something." Looking back, that's when I think I got really excited. The prospect of seeing more of this world was more than my mind could process at the time. This was bigger than just movies. This had become an experience. Then in 1983, it was over. Return of the Jedi was released and we got closure. For years, there was very little in terms of anything new. In 1991, Timothy Zahn wrote Heir to the Empire and its sequels, and there were the comics. However, there wasn't anything new on the movie front. In 1997, the special editions were released to preview the new technology for the new movies, and then came news of a new trilogy. When the new trilogy hit theaters, there was something a bit off. Admittedly, we were trying to recapture those moments back in 1977 when we first saw the movie, but that was a different time. We were all different people back then. I guess the old saying really is true, that you really can't go home again. In 2005, Revenge of the Sith was released, wrapping up the prequel trilogy, and we all kind of went our separate ways. Much like a high school reunion of sorts.
Star Wars has been a part of my life as long as I can remember. I don't remember going to see the films in theaters because I was so young at the time, but I was at a prime age when they came out on video. I do remember when Return of the Jedi premiered on home video in 1986. Growing up, I went through no less than 3 copies of the films, and even when Star Wars was no longer muttered on the playground, I would still enjoy a trilogy marathon, probably weekly. Empire Strikes Back has been my favorite film as long as I can recall. I remember feeling like everyone rediscovered my favorite thing in 1994 when the THX remastered versions were released, and then when the special editions followed in 1997. I felt like the world had finally caught up with me again in appreciating these landmark films in cinema history. When the prequels hit the scene, Star Wars popularity was at an all-time fever pitch. My relationship changed with the release of the prequel trilogy, though. What started with a huge bang ended with a near thud by the time 2005's Revenge of the Sith had rolled around. It felt like a funeral in a lot of ways. Some would argue that fans' disenchantment with the prequels was due to them not living up to expectations and fan stories and theories we had in our own minds at the time. Sound familiar? I think a lot of us just realized that Lucas wasn't interested in Star Wars and was doing these more out of an obligation of some type and to show off his fancy special effects that ILM was producing. It was clear to many that the prequels weren't much more than a commercial for ILM and to sell more toys. It was here that I grew a great disdain for CGI as well. The prequels were wall-to-wall computer effects with no soul. Something that would get worse, it would seem, but more on that later.
I hate to think about it in terms like this, however, I really think there's this certain cynicism around Star Wars these days. It's been broadcast, rebroadcast, merchandised, and repackaged. Unlike other series that have been consistently popular in either book or movie form, Star Wars became this thing that many younger people thought was just kind of there. It got to the point where it became part of the zeitgeist that was actively parodied and, joked about. But I think that with all the rebranding and repackaging in recent years, it's lost some of that specialness that it once had. I think it's primarily seen as a film-as-product brand now, especially so by a lot of the quote-unquote cool kids who tend to hate things that are popular. The other problem is that under Disney, it's lost part of what once made it special, and that's its sense of wonderment. One of my favorite moments in the original trilogy is when Luke looks off into the horizon on Tatooine, and you hear the score and it rises to a crescendo, and you get this feeling that there's this bigger world out there. It's such a simple moment, yet it's so effective. Where is that moment or a moment like it in the newer films? It's that sense of wonderment that makes people of all ages want to experience it. Star Wars movies always had those great moments you want to reenact with either the toys or with your friends on the playground. What moments are there in these new films that children want to reenact? An hour 45 slow-speed car chase through space? Who in these new films would children want to be? Rose Tico? Finn? Rey? Someone who could do everything out of the box, who basically is a blank slate and has no hero's journey? The closest thing you come to a hero in these new movies is Poe Dameron, and they handcuffed him in The Last Jedi. These new movies really offer children nothing to really aspire to. There's no aspirational heroes in them whatsoever. What struggle do they have to overcome? There's nothing for children to grab onto and say, I wish I could be as brave as that when I grow up. It seems that Disney has made every conceivable unforced error with Star Wars that you could make. The saddest thing is I really do think that the brand is permanently damaged from this. Losing an entire generation of children is going to cast a long shadow upon the franchise, especially now that Marvel has risen to prominence, at least until Disney makes the same mistakes with Marvel as it did with Star Wars.
For years, it had felt like an era had ended. We could look back fondly on 3 amazing films and 3 not-so-amazing films. Closure had been met, it seemed. For over a decade, I went on with my normal life, until it was announced that not only was Disney buying Lucasfilm, but we were gonna get a new slew of Star Wars material, including a brand new sequel trilogy. Like many, I was stoked and primed for what most fans have wanted for over 30 years. I enjoyed The Force Awakens and Rogue One quite a bit, and honestly, things didn't seem to go south for me until The Last Jedi. Walking out of The Last Jedi, though, I knew the feeling I had, but couldn't place it. I kept saying to myself, I'm not sure if I liked it or not. That should have been my first clue that something was off. While discussing the film with colleagues and friends, it began to dawn on me how severe the damage was. A lifelong Star Wars fan was being lost. By the time Solo hit the screens, I wasn't keen on the idea of anyone playing Han except for Harrison Ford to begin with. And that being said, I still tried to give the film a chance. Like many though, this was the final nail in the coffin for me. Granted, Solo isn't nearly as bad as a film overall as The Last Jedi, but the fact that it was so unnecessary to begin with, on top of all the other issues the film has, it was enough to turn me away from the franchise. When someone asks me what my favorite film is anymore, my go-to answer isn't Empire Strikes Back. Not because that movie has changed at all, but my outlook on Star Wars has. Its importance in my life as a whole, and as a film fan, has been forever changed by the way things have been handled by those making the films and Disney. My son, who's never been a huge film fan, decided to go to The Force Awakens with me, but he was out in the arcade before the first act had completed. If it was any other kid, this would have been a red flag. At the time, though, I just chalked it up to my teenager not being interested in dad's kids' movies. I have a feeling I'm not the only one who feels this way. A big reason kids aren't into Star Wars anymore is because Disney has turned off the core fans, their parents. Over 2 generations have passed on the Star Wars films, a tradition I feel that's ending fast. Movies like Wizard of Oz, King Kong, and many Disney animated classics share this tradition. Although those just mentioned will weather any new things thrown at the franchise and live on and on, I'm not so sure it will for Star Wars. The damage may be too severe. The franchise may have hit more than just a speed bump. It may have hit a brick wall. where other franchises and properties can be reborn again and again. The fact that the original characters, played by the original actors, have been so sullied and destroyed, that may be its undoing. Before anyone comments that the movies just weren't what I had in mind or lived up to some unreachable expectation or fan theory, I've heard it all before with the prequels, remember? I'm not a fan of fan theories, nor do I generally make my own. The Last Jedi was so damaging to the franchise, I'm not sure it will recover. There is no soul left in these films. I don't think George can come fix it, or that JJ will make it better. In a video I did a while back, I compared what is happening between Star Wars and the fans much like a breakup. The breakup is final. I've moved on fondly from time to time. I remember Star Wars, but in the end it wasn't for me, and I'm probably better off. Hopefully.
Tom and Robb's stories are theirs alone, but I have a hunch their general sentiments are shared by many fans out there. Fans whose commitment to Star Wars may be dwindling. Are you still a hardcore fan, or do you also feel your affection towards the brand fading? Let us know in the comments.
Before you go, check out these other videos that may interest you, and our sister channel Midnight's Edge After Dark for more live shows and more laid-back content.